People like me don't move into the Cabinet Mountains by accident. You don't buy 80 acres of steep timber, broken ravines, and cold-running creeks because you're chasing convenience or good cell reception. You come out here because you like quiet, because you want to watch the world without being watched yourself, because you value the kind of solitude most people find unsettling. I'd lived on my spread for 6 years when everything began, long enough that the rhythms of the land felt as familiar as a heartbeat. I knew where the elk wintered, which ridgeline the wolves preferred when they ran the valley, how the cougars circled the creek bottoms. I spent most evenings on my porch with a thermos or a beer, flying a drone out over the property just to see what moved below the canopy. Some folks track stocks or watch the news. I tracked animals. It kept me sane. Nothing in those first 3 years prepared me for what I ended up witnessing. You hear stories in Montana, Bigfoot this, Dogman that, but they are just stories. Campfire entertainment. A way for hunters to kill time when the weather's too foul to stalk anything with hooves. I never put much stock in any of it. I believed in predators I could identify. Bears, wolves, coyotes, mountain lions, things that fit inside a field guide. Then, last spring, I saw something else entirely migrate into the area, something that should not exist, and it started manipulating the local ecosystem like it was pruning a garden, not just hunting for food, but rearranging the entire fauna with a kind of intelligence and long-term planning I'd never imagined. Most folks will never see a predator long enough to understand its habits. I spent nearly a year tracking this strange being with binoculars, trail cams, and drones, studying it and trying to make sense of the things it did. And even now, part of me wishes I'd never launched the drone that first night. Because once I started watching, I couldn't stop. And once I understood what I was dealing with, well, you never unsee something like that. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It started, as these things often do, with something small. A routine evening, a quiet porch, and a drone flight that should have shown me nothing more interesting than elk chewing cud in the timber. Instead, it showed me the first sign that something very wrong had moved into my valley. That evening felt no different from the hundreds that came before it. I slipped on my FPV goggles, powered up the drone, and sent it buzzing out over the treetops like I always did. The air was cool, still, and clean, one of those early spring nights when the mountains seemed half asleep. I wasn't expecting anything except the usual: elk moving through the timber, maybe a bear nosing along the creek if I was lucky. The drone cleared the pines, and for a moment, everything looked exactly as it should. The creek shimmered pale in the fading light, deer grazed along a slope, and the cedars rocked lazily in the breeze. But when I dipped the drone lower along the first ravine, something caught my eye and froze me in place. A full-grown elk cow lay slaughtered in the brush, not unusual by itself, but beside the carcass lay something else. 2 coyotes, both dead. They looked crushed, broken, smashed by something large with a considerable amount of force. Intrigued, I pulled the drone in closer. The scene didn't quite make sense. Coyotes die messy deaths, snarling, scrambling, biting, but these two, both bodies were mangled almost beyond recognition. One had its ribs split open like a dropped crate, deep parallel claw rakes carved from shoulder to belly. The other lay twisted on its back, one shoulder by what looked like a single crushing bite, jaw hanging loose, eyes bulging as if it had been squashed like a rag doll. A large predator killing smaller ones over a carcass wasn't unusual in itself, but the elk beside the coyotes had barely been touched. Aside from similar huge bite and claw marks on its neck and flank, evidence that something had taken it down, its body remained largely intact. Whatever had killed all 3 animals had walked away without feeding on any of them. My mind ran through every possibility I knew. Maybe whatever large predator had done this had been drawn away by something else, but that explanation didn't quite satisfy me. This whole thing looked wrong. Too clean in some places, too violent in others. The next day, I launched the drone again just after dusk. A thin band of orange still clung to the horizon, but the ravines were already sinking into blue shadow. The drone was equipped with infrared vision, so I could still see animals in the dark. I sent the drone along the same route as the night before, half expecting the carcasses to be dragged off or torn apart by scavengers. That was the natural order of things out here. Meat didn't last long on the ground. But when the camera swept over the ravine, the elk was still there, lying in the exact same spot where I'd first seen it. The two coyotes, however, were gone, vanished completely, leaving only flattened grass and dark smears where their bodies had been. Not partially eaten, not scattered, just gone. In that same small depression, slumped beside the elk like someone had arranged a macabre diorama, was a single dead wolf. An adult female with silver-tipped fur along her muzzle, her legs splayed at unnatural angles. Again, not entirely strange, as both black bears and grizzlies can and will kill wolves if they get too close. But the elk carcass remained largely intact, its ribcage barely exposed, entrails untouched. If a bear had killed the wolf, it would have torn through at least one of the carcasses, leaving behind a mess of scattered meat and torn hide. I felt a cold ripple move through me as I eased the drone lower. The wolf showed signs of a struggle, but not the kind wolves normally lose. Its throat looked crushed inward, and its flank bore deep puncture wounds from jaws far larger than its own. The rest of the pack, at least 4 more wolves I'd seen on my trail cameras over the previous few weeks, was nowhere to be seen. No tracks, no blood trail. Something had killed this wolf and then stopped, or left, or moved on to something else. The stillness around the carcass felt almost staged, like a warning more than a scene of predation. I guided the drone in a slow arc down the ravine, letting the infrared vision pull detail out of the darkness. The daylight was gone, but the screen still glowed with clear temperature signatures. Every warm body in the area lit up like a lantern against the cooling terrain. For a moment, the screen showed only the creek glinting between stones. Then movement flickered on the right edge of the feed. Down near a mud pit, where the creek widened into a shallow pool, something huge slipped into the water. One moment, it was a massive silhouette moving through the brush, and the next, it was almost fully submerged, disappearing beneath the churned mud and reeds. Whatever it was moved strangely. It almost looked to be standing upright for a moment, but vanished before the camera could adjust its focus. I tried to get closer, but the battery alarm screamed at me. 10%, then 9. I made one tight circle over the mud pit, trying to catch another glimpse, but the drone forced itself into automatic return. I muttered a few choice words and let it come back. I recharged the drone and headed out again later that night, but the strange shape in the mud pit was long gone. The elk and the wolf were still there, still mostly untouched. By the next morning, the unease in my gut hadn't settled. Curiosity can get a man killed out here, but situational awareness keeps him alive, makes him pay attention. After breakfast, I grabbed my rifle, slung a revolver on my hip, and hiked down toward the ravine to set up a pair of trail cameras. I didn't like the idea of being down there on foot, not after what I'd seen from above, but I needed to understand what was going on. The drone could only be flown for about 20 minutes at a time, and it took 5 minutes just to get to the ravine from my cabin. The trail cameras were a much more convenient option. The woods were quiet in that particular way that makes the hair on your arms lift. No birds were calling, no squirrels chattering. Even the creek seemed muted as I crossed it. When I reached the site, the elk carcass was still lying where it had been, stiff now, its hide tightening in the morning air. The wolf lay beside it, untouched. Nothing had fed on any of them. Not coyotes, not bears, not even ravens. That alone set off alarms in my head. Scavengers should have picked these bones clean overnight. Instead, it felt like walking into a room no one was supposed to enter. I kept my rifle ready as I moved around the clearing. About 20 yards from the carcasses, I strapped the first camera to a young spruce, angling it directly at the elk and the wolf. The second, I placed high on the ravine's edge, overlooking the entire depression. That one would catch anything moving in or out. The whole time I worked, I felt watched. My gut told me that something was out there, but it didn't show itself that day. I worked as quickly as possible and headed back to the cabin. That night, just past midnight, the alert from the first trail camera pinged my phone. One image had been captured, only one. I opened it expecting a bear, or maybe another wolf feeding on the elk. Instead, my breath caught in my throat. The photograph showed a massive, nightmarish face filling nearly the entire shot. Distinct canine muzzle, massive compact jaws parted slightly, rows of sharp teeth slick with moisture. The creature's eyes, set deep in a skull too large for any known wolf species, reflected the camera flash with a sickly yellow shine. Its fur was soaked and matted with mud, hanging off its skull in heavy rope-like strands. But what stopped my breath cold wasn't just the face, it was the shape behind it. Broad shoulders that tapered to a powerful waist, upright posture that no quadruped should possess, an upper body shaped disturbingly like a man's, thick through the chest with ropey muscles visible even beneath the matted pelt, arms hanging too long at its sides with what looked like gnarled, clawed fingers. The junction where that grotesque wolf's head met the humanoid torso was a nightmare of anatomy, tendons and fur merging in ways that defied natural evolution, as if some mad taxidermist had forced two incompatible specimens together and then brought the abomination to life. My lungs seized, as if crushed in a vice, oxygen replaced by pure animal panic that flooded every cell in my body. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My ancestors' terror of the night surged through my blood, screaming danger in a language older than words. This thing, this abomination, stood on two legs like a mockery of humanity, its posture an obscene violation of natural law, its eyes locked onto the camera with predatory intelligence, not just seeing the lens, but seeing through it, seeing me, with a hunger that felt ancient and patient and utterly, utterly personal. Dogman. The word exploded in my skull like a shotgun blast, shattering everything I thought I knew about these mountains. Every campfire story, every drunken hunter's claim I'd laughed off as pure horseshit came rushing back with teeth. My hands went ice cold, my throat closed. No bear, no wolf, nothing in these mountains, nothing in this world should have that face, those eyes, that posture. The screen blurred as sweat dripped into my eyes. Then my phone vibrated violently. Camera 1 offline. Before I could process it, another alert chimed. Camera 2 had triggered. A thumbnail loaded onto my screen, blurry and distorted, but unmistakable. The creature was in mid-motion, its massive arm swinging toward the first camera. The violent movement must have tripped the second camera's sensor despite the distance. The flash must have agitated the thing, or maybe it was my scent. It had destroyed camera 1. I sat there on my porch with the cold glow of the screen on my face, listening to the forest breathe around me, trying to understand what I had just seen. Something powerful and intelligent had walked straight up to my trail camera, and it had not appreciated my intrusion. Whatever had moved into my valley was no ordinary animal. After what happened to the trail cameras, I changed the settings on the two closest to the cabin, the ones facing the tree line north and west of the clearing. Normally, I kept their alerts silenced. Out here, a squirrel blurring past the lens or a deer nosing around the salt block could ping your phone 50 times a night. But now I wanted to know the moment anything came near the cabin, especially that thing. It turned out to be a smart decision. Sometime around 4 in the morning, I was asleep at the time. The alarm tone ripped through the quiet, a harsh metallic chime I'd set specifically for emergencies. For a second, I didn't know what the hell was going on. The next second, I was fully awake, heart hammering, hand already reaching for the rifle propped beside my bed. I moved from room to room, staying low, scanning the clearing through each window with the infrared scope mounted on my 30-06. The cabin was dark, silent, except for my own breathing. Outside, the forest pressed against the edge of the clearing like a single black wall. At first, I didn't see anything. Then, on the west side of the property, something flickered in the thermal view, an unnatural shape tucked into the brush, a large, crouched figure, motionless except for the faint rise and fall of its breathing, broad. The heat signatures of its chest and head were unmistakable. It was the Dogman. It must have followed my scent from the ravine all the way back to the cabin. It wasn't attacking. It was perfectly still, observing the cabin the same way I had been observing it, silent, patient, calculating. For a moment, I considered taking it out. People will say I should have put a bullet into its brain right then and there, that I had a once-in-a-lifetime chance to kill something dangerous beyond belief. But the truth is, I wasn't afraid of it the way most would expect. I was more curious than terrified. This impossible creature wasn't behaving like a rabid animal or some mindless monster. I was thinking, testing the perimeter just like I would if I were scouting unfamiliar territory, and I wanted to know more about this thing, to understand what it was and where it came from. So instead of aiming for its head, I lined up a shot at the side of one of its massive thighs. I wanted to hurt it, but not seriously enough for it to bleed out or not be able to hunt anymore. It was supposed to be a warning, a message. 60 yards out, crouched and still, it was an easy shot. The shot was deafening in the confined space that was my kitchen. But I didn't flinch. I kept the scope up and watched. The round grazed it, just as I had hoped. I saw it jerk to the side, then scramble back into the woods. Whether it understood that or not, the creature didn't return to the cabin again for a long time. Not that night. Not the night after. Not once in the weeks that followed. It was clear this thing was much smarter than I initially gave it credit for. Smart enough to test boundaries, and smart enough to respect them once established. I didn't know it then, but that brief encounter was only the beginning. The real lesson, that this creature was planning something far larger than a territorial probe, was still ahead of me. The following days settled into an uneasy routine. Every day after dusk, I sent the drone out once or twice, sweeping the ravines and creek corridors, and every morning, I checked whatever the remaining trail camera had recorded during the night. I expected the Dogman to come back to the cabin, or to dismantle the second camera as easily as it had destroyed the first, but it didn't. Instead, it seemed to vanish into the deeper parts of the ravine network, showing itself only in fragments, heat blurs, partial silhouettes, brief shapes slipping between cedar trunks. Then one evening, the drone caught it more clearly than ever before. I was running a low pass through a side corridor of the ravine, a place dense with chokecherry and young spruce, when the thermal feed picked up a stationary heat signature tucked into the vegetation. At first, I thought it was a bear bedding down, but the shape was wrong. Too angular, too slender. I steadied the drone and eased closer. There it was, the Dogman, completely motionless, its limbs folded in tight, waiting for something. Watching that image, one of the most dangerous creatures I'd ever seen sitting still as stone, barely breathing, I felt that same cold ripple run down my back. Later that night, the trail camera confirmed what the drone had hinted at. Just before dawn, the remaining camera triggered, sending a thumbnail straight to my phone. In the shot, a mountain lion was feeding on the elk carcass. The next image, taken only seconds later, showed chaos. A blur of movement, a massive shape exploding out from the brush at the mouth of the ravine, the Dogman. When I reviewed the full footage later, the sequence became unmistakable. The mountain lion never had a chance. The spot the Dogman had chosen for its ambush funneled everything into a narrow choke point. The cougar had entered the ravine and walked past the Dogman without noticing it. The Dogman had positioned itself so it would block the only easy escape route the moment it came out of its hiding spot. By the time the cat realized that something was wrong, the Dogman was already on top of it. Judging by the time stamps of the photos, the fight lasted less than 10 seconds. The photos were blurry as everything happened very quickly, but I could still see that the mountain lion's body had been lifted up into the air and swung against the rock wall right beside the elk, then left right there to rot. The ravine had become a natural kill box, and the Dogman knew exactly how to use it. But something else stood out in the footage, something that bothered me even more than the violence itself. The Dogman's heat signature was faint, patchy, and unstable. Most large mammals glow bright in infrared, but this thing barely registered beyond the outline of its head and parts of its torso. At first, I thought the camera was malfunctioning. Then I remembered the mud pit. The following night, the drone confirmed it. Flying a slow circle above the same pool where I'd seen the creature dive earlier, I watched it roll in the mud, deliberately, thoroughly, coating every inch of its body in thick, wet silt until it looked like a moving mound of earth rather than a living animal. The wet layer acted like insulation, masking its heat signature, but I think it likely masked scent as well. I think the Dogman somehow understood that and used it to become invisible to other predators. That's when the pattern finally snapped into focus. The elk hadn't been left there by chance. It had been placed as bait. That explained everything. The untouched meat, the dead coyotes, the lone wolf dropped beside it like an afterthought. Every predator in the area would be drawn to a carcass that size, especially one so oddly pristine, and every one of them had walked straight into the same trap. The Dogman wasn't just killing. It was arranging everything like pieces on a board, using bait, mud, terrain funnels, even the bodies of its victims to shape the behavior of everything around it. This wasn't random predation. This thing was acting strategically. I didn't yet understand the full scope of what it was doing, but I began to understand how smart this thing really was. What it did next proved it beyond any doubt. The Dogman left each kill, wolf, coyote, even the mountain lion, lying there for 2 or 3 days, just long enough for the scent to ripen and spread through every corridor of the ravine. Fresh bait brought fresh victims. Over the following days, I watched it ambush anything drawn to the smell. Foxes slinking in from the brush, bobcats creeping along the ledges, and curious young coyotes nosing their way toward the carcasses. All of them died fast. Then, one night, a large black bear wandered in to claim the elk. The Dogman never showed itself. It stayed hidden, waiting, smart enough to pick its battles wisely. It made sense. This thing hadn't come back to my cabin after I shot it for the same reason it didn't confront the bear. It knew when a fight wasn't worth the risk. It was cautious, calculating, and far more intelligent than any animal I'd ever encountered. As the days turned into weeks, my drone flights shifted from curiosity to something closer to obsession. Every evening, I sent it out across the valley, letting the thermal camera paint the ravines in shades of heat and darkness. And every morning, without fail, I checked the remaining trail cameras. Other than the one overlooking the ravine and the 2 guarding my cabin, I had another 4 scattered throughout the forest. Over time, I slowly pieced together where all the dead predators had gone. They hadn't vanished. They'd been moved. At first, I thought the Dogman had dragged the carcasses off and fed on them, but the drone showed something far stranger. Scattered throughout the ravine network and the surrounding forest, in side corridors, shadowed clefts of rock, high up in trees, I started noticing shapes, irregular, lumpy shapes wedged high in cedar forks or packed into low overhangs. When I flew closer and adjusted the IR contrast, the truth clicked into place with a sickening lurch. Meat stashes, not random wildlife caches either. These were deliberate placements, strategic, efficient, terrifying. Some were lodged 15 or 20 feet off the ground in trees, the bodies twisted into the branches as if shoved there with brute force. Others lay in shallow burrows or small caves, barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. It took another few drone flights before I understood the bigger picture. Some of these stash sites weren't just storage, they were also ambush points, perfect kill pockets. The carcasses high up in the trees would spread their scent much farther than those deep down in the ravine. The smell of rotten meat probably carried for miles, drawing in predators from further away. Every creature within reach would eventually come investigate, and the Dogman kept killing them. Over the next few nights, I watched it repeat the same pattern again and again. Approach the stash, lie in wait, let the scent do its work, and then kill whatever answered the call. But there was one important exception. I never saw it make a move against adult black bears or the few grizzlies that wandered through the area. Bears would occasionally amble up to a stash and feed undisturbed while the dogman stayed hidden somewhere in the timber. It didn't challenge them, didn't posture, didn't even reveal itself. The bears were too big, too risky, and too unpredictable to bother with. Not worth the injury, not worth the energy. They never lingered long. Bears regulate themselves the way they always have, through dominance, bluster, and the occasional bloody fight. They came, fed, and moved on. They weren't part of the predator hierarchy that the dogman was obviously dismantling. Bears are omnivores. They don't compete much with true predators. Watching it avoid them only reinforced what I was already suspecting. This thing was selective, calculating, and frighteningly aware of which fights mattered and which didn't. Later that summer, sometime in early August, I had one of the strangest and most unsettling encounters of the entire year. I'd gone down to one of the side trails to retrieve the SD card from a camera overlooking a small gorge. The ravine was quiet, the evening air warm with that dry heat that settles over the cabinets in late season. I remember thinking the woods felt calmer than they had in months, as if the dogman's steady purge of predators had created a temporary lull. I should have known better. I was crouched beside the spruce that held the camera, swapping out the memory card, when a sound broke the silence behind me. A low, abrupt exhale. Not a growl, not a branch snap, more like a warning breath, loud enough to make my whole body jerk. I spun around, heart hitting my ribs, my hand already on the revolver at my side. The dogman was standing no more than 20 yards away. It was just there, upright and still, as if it had materialized between one blink and the next. For a moment, I couldn't make sense of the shape. Broad shoulders, long arms hanging at its sides, head angled just slightly as it watched me. I pulled the revolver free, raising it halfway out of instinct, but I didn't fire, and it didn't charge. We simply stared at each other. Every muscle in my body locked up, torn between running and squeezing the trigger. But the creature didn't move. It didn't even posture. No teeth bared, no forward lean. It just stood in the brush, chest rising and falling slowly, watching me with a kind of quiet, unnerving curiosity. 40 seconds, maybe less, but it felt like a lifetime. Then, as calmly as a man turning to leave a room, it pivoted on its heel and walked back into the woods. No rush, no fear, no sign of agitation, just a deliberate, controlled retreat. And I understood the message immediately. It wanted me to see it. That breath, that deliberate noise, it had announced itself. It could have ambushed me from that distance, but it didn't. It had no interest in a fight with someone who could hurt it. It had more than enough meat stashed away already. This was its territory, and I was something like a tolerated neighbor, dangerous, unpredictable, but not worth eliminating. The valley had a new apex predator now, one far more intelligent than anything I'd ever imagined, and it wanted me to know that it knew exactly who I was. The following year proved it beyond any doubt. With wolves, coyotes, and bobcats gone, the deer and elk populations in the valley exploded. The dogman appeared less and less at its ambush sites, as if satisfied with the work it had done, content now to let the ecosystem run on the rails it had laid. Prey was abundant, and the only animals it had to share with were the few bears still roaming the area. Sightings of the creature increased across the region, but there were no attacks on humans, pets, or livestock. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't interested in us. Not unless we crossed some invisible line. I never shared what I knew outside of this video. I have no interest in cryptid hunters or, God forbid, the government swarming my land. The valley is quiet, balanced in its own strange way, and for now at least, I am content to let things stay exactly as they are.